Devji. Afternoon, well, morning, afternoon, and evening for those persons attending overseas. My name is Teelucksingh. I'm a board member of the Trinidad and Tobago Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group. And myself, along with the chair of the TTMAG, will be hosting this session, which is the open forum. The open forum is an open discussion. What we want to do is have this consultation with our attendees on some of the issues that are facing Trinidad and Tobago directly. So, and what I will invite you to do is to go to igf.tt, because what we have done, we have set up forms for the attendees to complete. And the idea being we will then take this feedback from the forms and perhaps use it to synthesize our comments to these issues. So if you go to igf.tt, you'll go to the open forum link, and there are 3 forms there. And the three policies that we want to discuss is the 2 from the Telecoms Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, which talked about a policy paper on net neutrality and over-the-top services in Trinidad and Tobago. And another issue that is of importance to persons in Trinidad and Tobago is the United Nations Global Digital Compact. So the forms, and probably what I will do is post the forms in the chat. So let's start with net neutrality. Right, that's the first form. So, well, I guess I'll ask the chair, do you want me to share my screen or something and then go through the form? And
yeah, I think that'll be best if you share the, if you're sharing, right. I think the first Google form, because you have we took the information you provide to us and put that on the form directly. So even the preamble and the stuff is there already.
Right. Okay.
Session
right.
1.
So hopefully everybody's seeing my screen now. Right. Yeah. So, all right, so I'm just to show you where it is on the website. This is the igf.tt. Just go to TTF 2023 open forum and scroll down to the forms, which talks about which are the 3 issues that we've mentioned. So, net neutrality in Trinidad and Tobago. So, net neutrality, for those who may not be aware, is the principle that the ISP has to provide access to all sites, applications, and content at the same speed, under the same conditions, without blocking or giving preference to any content. So the Telecom Authority of Trinidad and Tobago has posted a document for mid last year for comment, and it specifies several things. I'll make this a little bigger. It makes several statements. And perhaps what we would like to do is get some feedback as to what do you think about what is being recommended by the Telecoms Authority, whether you agree with it, something should be changed. So with that in mind, let me just walk you through some of the poll questions. So, the authority talked about, says that net neutrality rules shall include exemptions for reasonable traffic management practices and measures. And it defines that as measures implemented to deal traffic on the network, primarily for technical management services. And these practices and measures, things on network security, mitigating the effects of congestion, meeting quality of service standards, enforce court-ordered requirements or legal provisions or requirements, and maybe even prioritize emergency services. And they're legitimate when they're implemented in adherence to principles of transparency, transiency, non-discrimination, proportionality, and fair competition. So what are the recommendations from that is that the ISP will notify the authority 30 days prior to its implementation or as required by the authority. And in the event of an emergency, the ISP will notify the authority within 7 days after the measure has been implemented. And the ISP will then notify its customers at least 7 days in advance of changes to its traffic management policies. So the questions that we want to find out is 30 days sufficient notice for ISPs to notify the authority? Is that enough? Should it be less than 30 days or should it be greater than 30 days? And in the event of an emergency, when the put my email address so I can progress. And in the event of an emergency, is to notice the authority within 7 days after the change sufficient? And is 7 days sufficient notice to customers of changes to its traffic management policies? Let me just see if there's anybody in the chat or.
Yep, so I think what we want to do here, so while you can fill out the form as well, we want to get your feedback here on the open forum. Please feel free to raise your hand, type in the chat what you're feeling. If you want to ask any questions, actually, because this is also the time to ask questions. But what exactly is all this net neutrality about? Feel free to do so. As I said, the filling out of the form is not mandatory during this session. We'll have it open thereafter. So we are trying to collate your feedback, your comments, your inputs, and of course your questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them, and we'll do our best to answer them. Dev T will be the expert on this particular aspect, so I will I will definitely have to defer to Dev T. I will add my 2 cents if I need to, or anybody else on the TTMAG directorship if they wish to. So floor is open for any questions. For example, I will start it. Dev, what example? There's a question in chat already, so I don't need to start. All right, let's go.
Well, all right. So my thoughts on this is that, the chat has something.
Yep.
Okay, that's considering our water provided by state.
Yes, considering that our water, electricity, energy, and communication are provided by state enterprises, it may be time. Or is this something?
It's more for a comment on the previous sessions.
Okay, sorry.
What Kevin was also saying. Noted. Thanks for that comment. But okay, so my thinking was that, I'm part of the Trinidad and Tobago Computer Society, so we had this discussion within our organization, and for that matter, what our feelings was that it shouldn't be very passive. What should happen is that if there's a change of the traffic management policies, the ISP needs to inform the telecoms authority well in advance. So it should be greater than 30 days. And the reason for that being is that customers need to be informed of changes well beyond 7 days. And the idea would be that it's not just notifying, because it really needs that the authority should really approve or reject the change in management policy, and then it's implemented. The customers are notified, and so forth. If there's an emergency,
give me an example of what that might be. Like, what is a change to traffic management policy for those who might not understand that?
Okay, so a possible change in the traffic management policy could be like we would stop, because so many people are using streaming services. We are going to reduce the bandwidth available to those streaming services, because everybody's going online at the same time doing it.
Yep. There's a question. Question in the Zoom. Go ahead. Yep.
Great. I see Ajmal has also raised a hand. Ajmal?
Yeah, hi. So that question from an ISP's perspective, I'm not sure what they're asking for, what it's asking for, or if it makes sense. From the ISP's perspective, traffic management is done on a dynamic basis. So once you put the policies in place, your routers and switches and your traffic shaping devices will automatically handle the traffic and prioritize based on what's going on. So if there's an increase in utilization, your traffic shaping policies, without you having to change them, would kick in and take the necessary actions to deal with that if they need to prioritize. So an example would be they may decide to prioritize low latency traffic over other traffic in times of congestion. So when congestion takes place, the ISP is not going to have 30 days to notify TAP that we're about to do this. Secondly, where you may see a drastic changes is in the event of an outage, right? An event that is unplanned for. And again, that 30 days notice, I don't think is going to be really relevant. The traffic management policies are not, let's say, granular or static, as I think the question is suggesting.
Well, I view it as what I think is that the ISP needs to really declare all of these policies up front, so that and if there's going to be a change in those policies, like you're going to increase the amount of bandwidth or change the quality of service standards to low latency traffic or whatever, then that's when you need to apply to or notify the authority. And if there is an emergency, and the question of what exactly qualifies as an emergency is the next issue that probably we need to raise, because it's not clear.
So I will ask a question. So if there, for example, there's a civil disturbance in the country, right, as an example.
Right. Okay, well, I guess that would qualify as an emergency.
And we are all watching Netflix at home. Is it an opportunity, or is it a situation where the ISP will be asked or have to, or redirect traffic from Netflix and other streaming, YouTube and so on, to say, okay, watch the news or take it, or the police, the press conferences running on Facebook? I don't know. Is that something that's a reasonable thing that will happen, do you think? And is that part of what this covers?
Yes, I would say that those types of things, yeah. I guess my position is that it shouldn't be so big. It really needs to, in my mind, and maybe others we agree or disagree, was that you need to, the authority needs to define certain parameters, or what exactly are the different emergencies, whether it's a natural disaster, civil disobedience, those types of things, and the ISPs should have their provisions as to what exactly would happen. We will automatically cut traffic to Netflix and YouTube or whatever, and prioritize, emergency services and so forth and things like that. But yes, but broadly, I think that's the idea. Yes.
Right. And if there's no further comment or feedback coming in from we could simply move on, because I think it'll get clear to folks what's happening once we go through this. So because I know you've dissected it, it's in great comprehensive detail, so you'll be able to, it'll flow from one to the other. Just to reiterate, folks, and once again, there's no need to fill out the form now. Today, it might be good to ask the questions, put your feedback in the chat, ask the questions, or fill out the form if you wish. Walk through the form with us as we're going through it here. So feel free. This is the point of the open forum. We're trying to put some structure to it and field those questions, and we have our team here to take those questions.
Yeah. So the next part of the statement talks about how the assessment of traffic management policies, and it essentially says that the authority will conduct an assessment of traffic management policies to detect unreasonable practices. The ISP shall submit documents or reports, and the ISP shall maintain a log of their practices and measures for a period of 12 months. And the ISP can provide that log to the authority as its request. So the question was that, should ISPs log their traffic management practices and measures for a period longer than 12 months? Is 12 months sufficient? Should it be less? Should it be more? Maybe up to 2 years? Or should it even be greater than 2 years? So.
And I have a question. So this log that they're they're suggesting they will hold, would it contain any necessarily PII stuff, like, what you've been watching, what have individual IPs been looking at, that kind of thing? Do you think that will be contained in those logs? Would that be something that we need to be worried about, Dev?
It is potentially, yes, potentially, yes, because, so the emphasis should be that the ISP should, the ISPs and the authority should not be collecting personal users' information, internet usage assessments, unless it's directed under any pertinent act, cybersecurity, interception warrant, et cetera, those types of things. But I think the idea behind this is to really, when did you all make adjustments of the policies? When did you all, make the change from giving more bandwidth to certain things? At what time? When did it stop? That type of log is what I'm thinking.
Right.
So yeah. So I think personally, I would think it needs to be a little bit more than 12 months, because you may need some sort of historical time to review the policies, and 12 months may be insufficient, especially if the issues that occur later down in the line and it's not clear when it happened. So, so the next part here talks about reasonable traffic management, monitoring strategies, guidelines, procedures, and what happens is that it works through the sort of the workflow, as if what happens if the authority has reasons to believe that a management policy is unreasonable. And so the authority notifies the ISP responds to the authority, a second notice of non-compliance issued by the authority. If the ISP has not responded, and then after that second notice, the authority makes a determination and then takes legal action as available under the Act. The ISP can appeal, and the authority can then consider new information submitted and decide accordingly. So the question is, what I thought would be pertinent is, should the authority notify the public if it has reasons to believe that an ISP's traffic management policy is unreasonable? Because the way it's phrased, the communication only happens between the authority and the ISP.
Right.
And I think if my thing in the interest of transparency, my thinking is that the authority should notify the public, that we have issued a letter of correspondence because we want certain details. And I think, and certainly, I think the ISP's responses, suitably redacted, should also be published. So again, in the interest of transparency. So that's my thought.
So just a question again to stimulate the discussion. I know people may not be fully attuned what's happening here, but I noticed in many of these ISPs, especially mobile providers, fair usage. The word fair usage comes up, right? Especially on unlimited plans. Would fair usage and the throttling and those kinds of things that are in those documents, because when you read the fair usage policy, it speaks to the fact that they can throttle your speed if you are, if you're using bandwidth in their view unreasonably or some phrase they would use, and throttling to a lower speed, or reducing your line in the queue, so to speak. Is that a traffic management policy idea? And for example, can you complain about it? And then if so, can this be enacted as this string the chain? Can this actually be used to deal with something like that?
Yes, I would say yes. And in fact, some ISPs already do this already. For example, some ISPs don't allow your phone to use mobile data for data streaming as a personal hotspot, for example.
Yep.
It would actually block you from doing that. Which is a fair point. But then if you really do need to access that service and your personal hotspot is the only internet connection you have, because you're in the middle of nowhere, what do you do? But so there's pros and cons to everything. but yes, but generally, yes.
Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Like, I think this is something that people may not be realizing what's going on when they sign up on for these plans, fair usage policies. Anybody has any thoughts on that? Any reactions? Or are you learning along with us? Silence means they're learning, right? Let's continue.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's walk you through quickly on this thing. So, so then it also goes into statements on what is unreasonable discrimination and defines it. And also, factors in determining what is considered unreasonable forms of discrimination, and how to assess the whether a practice is discriminatory or not, and also how it can monitor it, and essentially a workflow which is very similar to the reasonable traffic management things. The authority would write to the ISP may respond. The authority will consider the ISP's response. Second notice if the ISP does not respond, and then if after the second notice, the authority may make a determination, and so forth, and the ISP can appeal. So, and again, so the core question from my mind is that should the authority notify the public if it believes that an ISP's agreement, network, or commercial practice constitutes unreasonable discrimination? And to me, it should be posted on.
What do colleagues think? I mean, do you think? I mean, this is a very straightforward issue here. That if it is that the authority has determined that the ISP is doing something which is contravenes what they believe it to be reasonable, then they should report it to the public. Do you think that's true? Do you think that they should do that, or should they keep it quiet? What do you think? What are your thoughts?
You can do a show of hands if you wish, if you don't want to see.
Yeah, you can do a show of hands. Put your hands, everything. They should.
Emote icons, or whatever.
Interesting that I'm not sure if they even realize the authority. Well, they're trying to. Well, Dev, is it true to say the authority currently has this power, or is what they're trying to?
Well, they have it as a sort of soft power. Let's put it that way. So when Digicel blocked Viber, which was a voice over IP service in 2015, I think, around so, and it did it unilaterally. The telecom authority had consultations with that provider, and eventually that was lifted. But it wasn't really, it was only like reported in the newspapers, but it wasn't really, there wasn't really the authority then issued a public statement on it and so forth. So it happens already, but in a kind of a, soft authority. The authority is making an inquiry, and there's some sort of communication or meeting happening between the ISP and the authority. It's no revelation.
And I know you're going to touch upon this in the next session on OTTs, but let me give you a scenario, Dev.
Yeah.
The government, excuse me, there's no party involvement here. The government, okay. Right? The government of the day decides that they do not like what's being said about them on social media application X or messaging application Y, right? As an example.
Yeah.
They then communicate with ISP A, B, C, D, E, or whatever, and say, I would like you to not have these applications available in Trinidad and Tobago because I don't like what is being said about us on those applications.
Yeah.
Can the authority utilize this provision, or can the ISP utilize these provisions to, let's say, push back against something like that? Or will the government have its way in a situation like that? I mean, I know it might not be a very easy answer, but I'm just throwing it out as a scenario that can arise.
So yes, so well, I mean, if you look at the wording in the Telecom Authority's document, they talk about lawful content. So, and I think that's the proviso that way you could capture such a scenario that if the government of the day says we don't think this is this content should be shown or disclosed or whatever, then yes, the authority can and the recommendations and the over-the-top services and so on kind of gear towards those things, can direct the ISPs to do something, block Facebook. You know, that's it. That can happen.
Can the ISPs do it themselves? So the scenario I'm raising is a little different. Is that the government goes directly to the ISPs, not to the authority.
Not to the authority.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose yes, they could. Yes, they could. And if the ISPs decide to comply immediately, it could happen. Yes. The authority could then intervene if it under this framework that if it detected certain blocking of something happening and so forth. And at least this framework does allow for well, the ISP to disclose that it's changed its traffic management policy, right, or it's blocking or whatever, and allow the authority to say, well, is this accurate? Why was this done, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Good, yeah.
And there are very specific requirements in terms of, well, this is not valid. Well, it is kind of the government, interception of communications, and there's a procedure in the Interception of Communications Act where if it wants to wiretap internet traffic, it goes before a court and gets a warrant, and the warrant is issued, I believe, directly to the ISP to implement.
Right.
To comply. So
I noticed Anton Constantine in the chat says, unfair usage should be juxtapositioned with unfair billing.
It's so weird something.
I.e. residents with low signal strength areas, extended outages, etc. That's an interesting point. So he's proposing that the unfair usage, well, the opposite of fair usage, unfair usage, should also be, it can't be a one-way street, right? So it talks about getting this quality of service literally that you are supposed to get as part of the of your package. Does this deal with those kinds of things? So, I mean, for example, I mean it's sort of I know it's a little different to what we discussed here, but if it is that people are consistently getting lower than advertised, promised services in terms of, let's say, 100 megs are getting only 75 or whatever. Does this cover that, or this is out of the scope of the situation?
I would think it's out of scope. I think so, because there's no well mentioning of, like, I mean, thinking about it. I see there's somebody who has a mic on.
Somebody who has a mic open, if it's possible, you can mute it.
Yeah. I mean, I think about it. If you can have a traffic management policy that says more internet bandwidth is allocated to this territory, say, as opposed to this territory. So you can say that, okay, Port of Spain is, you could say the Port of Spain area will get lower internet bandwidth to allow for greater bandwidth throughout the rest of Trinidad and Tobago, for example, during certain hours. So you could have those kind of guidelines, I guess, thinking more about it as a traffic management policy. So thinking more about it, maybe what Anton is suggesting is potentially covered under this. Yeah.
Right. I see Anthony Pearson is suggesting, I kind of similar to what we were just talking about. He says that he's not sure if this was discussed, but he's heard of customers complain of being disconnected or throttled when they exceed a specific data download amount, like a monthly data cap. The data cap is there, although the service is marketed as being unlimited. So again, that's the fair usage. That's the same fair usage argument you were So apparently,
Yes.
according to him, it has happened. I
Yes,
know
yeah, and well, ISPs do that as well. And in
Yeah.
fact, if you look at the contract, there's a little proviso with when you say unlimited, and there's a little fine print that says we reserve the right to impose throttling if you feel that it's detrimental to our network. Wording to that effect.
Yep.
So it already happens.
Yeah, so it's not so. So just to let you know that unlimited doesn't. So I mean, I'm doing some work in Europe currently, and unlimited there generally means unlimited. And I tested it myself, to be honest, and they don't throttle. Well, at least from what I could tell, they threaten to throttle. It's in the documents, but they don't. So I guess that's a different situation. But it's, apparently, I've also heard that argument, Anthony, that people have been throttled when they on unlimited packages. So there's some, and I believe I think there's if you read the fine print, there may actually be a figure. So it's not unlimited. They will tell you it's unlimited up to, and there's a figure they normally throw in there. You know, it might be 100 megs, 100 gigs, or whatever they end up saying it is. There's some figure there it's unlimited in theory, but not really in practice.
Yeah. So, yeah. So let me just try to wrap up this policy quickly. So the policy then goes to talk about transparency requirements. Now the ISP has this display on a website, on a website, information on how its technical and commercial conditions. So yes, so the conditions where it will throttle if you try to exceed bandwidth, etc., as the data cap idea. That's the concept here, and it's supposed to be like in a general form and a more detailed form, and they also have information. You know, they are supposed to provide the information on data caps and download speeds, latency. You know, its quality of service. It is going to try to provide, and any privacy policies and areas of address and so on, which is all reasonable. So the question I would ask is that, well, should all of that information be consolidated on the authority's website? Because you know, you're going to have links going to very different websites, maybe hard to find on the ISP's website. So when we commented, we said that it should be posted on the authority's website as well.
Yep, agreed.
Yeah. All right, and again, and it then goes in terms of the transparency in that, and it goes to the same workflow. If an ISP fails to meet transparency requirement, authority notifies the ISP responds, second notice, etc., etc., etc. And again, the comment will already is again, should the authority notify the public? Because again, the way the phrasing of the policies are, it's a private discussion between the ISP and the authority, or I should say between the authority and the ISP. And zero rating. Now, so zero rating, for those who don't know, is that where an ISP will, let me see if I can explain it easily, to not charge consumers access to a particular site or service or website or application or service. And there's pros and cons about zero-rated service. So the idea is that the ISP shall notify authority of its plan to zero-rate content 30 days prior to implementation. And it goes into the same way as how they deal with reasonable traffic management. The authority shall consider as reasonable plans to serve what it serves, increasing broadband adoption, closing digital divide, facilitating access to government services, national security, etc. And it would evaluate each plan on a case-by-case basis. So our question was, is the ISP's 30-day prior notice to zero-rate content sufficient? Should it be, is 30 days enough? it should be less than 30 days or it should be more than 30 days. And my thinking was that it should have been more than 30 days. And should the authority publish a notice on its website of an ISP's plan to zero-rate content? And how I think of it is that yes, it should.
So Dev, on that note, is it currently that when ISP zero-rate content, for those who don't know, you do experience zero-rating today. Many ISPs zero-rate WhatsApp messages, maybe not video, but messages. They zero-rate other websites, and during the pandemic, seeing they were zero-rating government services, etc., etc. So it's currently done, and it's been happening for some time actually. And this is a global issue, as you may or may not have heard. The question I'm asking is, has this been done without TAT's approval thus far?
Yeah, well, I'll say yes.
This is based on what the ISP wants to do, yes?
Yeah, it's basically what the ISP wants to do.
Right.
Whether the authority approached ISPs to zero-rate certain government services, I'm not sure. So it's not clear what happened in that circumstance. But when the pandemic happened, I think it was the way it was framed as when it was reported, that ISPs took unilateral action to say, we are going to zero-rate newspapers, Ministry of Health website, and so on and so on. I don't think the authority intervened in any way, or whether the authority requested it or anything of that sort. So it's unfortunately happening already. But at least this would set up a framework by which the authority would review it, and presumably may not, if it's anti-competitive or it constitutes an unfair commercial practice, there's a workflow by which the authority notifies the ISP, goes through that process again.
So let me throw a question out in the chat. You can just answer yes or no in the chat. Do you think services should be data rated? Do you think there should be zero rated services? Do you think so? Do you think it's useful? Just say yes or no. So do you think services should be zero rated? What do you think? Just yes or no in the chat. All right, Dev, you can go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So yeah. And so this is a long, actually, as you can now realize, this was a long policy statement here. This is just having out just the bare statements. So it goes into the assessment of commercial on what is considered unreasonable discrimination. It should monitor paid prioritization practices. For example, if access to a particular website is given higher priority or zero rated, and so forth. And again, does the whole workflow again. If the authority has reasons to believe an ISP paid prioritization agreement is anti-competitive or unfair commercial practice, ISP notifies, etc., etc., etc. And it goes on that way. So, our things was that, again, it should be public. You shouldn't have this as a private conversation. All these kind of requests for information should be made public. So, all right, I see quite a few people have responded.
Question from N Neptune. I don't know what was the question you're asking, N Neptune. I'm sorry.
I think he's talking about
it was on cybersecurity. We're not this. Yeah, so if you're discussing cybersecurity and Neptune, unfortunately, that's not the topic at the moment. So you'll have to ask someone else in the chat to help you with that. But we're not discussing that at the moment, unfortunately. That was in the previous session.
So okay, so that's the end of the poll. But I mean, obviously, the Telecoms Authority could respond in great detail to all of the policy issues and the preambles, if you wanted to also, whether you agreed with how the authority stated the preambles, introducing its determinations. You can also comment on that. So The second policy issue that the Telecom Authority posted was the framework of over-the-top services, and it's which is also very interesting because so over-the-top services, and there's a definition of over-the-top services, by the way. It's content, services, or applications accessed by the public via the internet that may be a substitute for and or may compete with a public telecoms or broadcasting service. All right, and so the scope of this framework is limited to OTT communications and OTT media services. So OTT communications is voice and messaging, and over the OTT media services. So if you think about it, that's things such as WhatsApp, Skype, I guess FaceTime as well.
I have a colleague says that everything on the internet is OTT.
Well, yes, I think yes, if you were to, yes, because if you go with, but the way the authority is now saying it is that if it competes or substitutes what a public telecommunications and or broadcasting service is doing. So if it's competing, then that is what the OTT that the authority is concerned with, not so much a general consumption website.
So I want to ask, before you even move on, I want to ask a question. Is that a realistic statement? So I know it's what the ITU is doing and so on, but the ITU and so on are representing the telecoms sector, right? So let me just pose a question to everybody. Do you think that question, that definition of OTTs, which are basically any service that competes with what is traditional telecom services, basically your telephone service, or in other cases, traditional cable and other type services, right? As an example. So services pre or prior to the internet. Do you think that that should be considered to be OTTs? And if that's the case, then be regulated? Just throw your yes or no's in the chat. Go ahead, Dev.
Okay. Well, the answer is I think it is treated as OTT, as the way the framework is defined. But because text messaging, for example.
Do we think it should be? That's the thing.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. But this is what the authority is saying.
So Rodney, but there's a question here. Rodney is asking, what about WhatsApp substitute services, such as BIP, which I think is offered by one of the operators? Right. BIP is a similar service like WhatsApp. Are they treated the same way by the?
Yes, well, the way the policy is framed, it's not. I guess we'll get to that, but generally I would say yes, but there's a proviso in that. And I guess I'll try to get into it within our time because I know we're going to be running out of time soon, and we need to cover the UN one. So this is a framework. It's not as saying we're going to be banning this or that or whatever. But what it is saying is that they're going to be examining OTT services against the existing legislation, and what it will then, it's recommending that it will assess on a case-by-case basis whether an OTT service can be classified as a telecoms or broadcasting service. And then it would then adapt its authorization framework to specify classifications for OTT communications and media services. And then it then will recommend that the legislative framework be updated to explicitly provide for over-the-top services to be under its remit, just as how telecommunication and broadcasting services are. Because then the OTT will be classified as a telecom service or broadcasting service. So broadcasting services would be things such as YouTube, Netflix, the other streaming services, Amazon Prime, etc. So and I guess that's a big question. Should the Telecommunications Act and other legislative frameworks be amended to incorporate OTTs, which will clarify their remit over any entity providing OTTs? And if you think about it, well, by saying something that needs to be under its remit, that means it needs to be potentially an OTT needs to be then registered or needs to comply with local, whatever the authorities' local policies or government policies.
So Ajmal is just saying, so I put a question in the chat, which is sort of I just threw a flamethrower in the chat, but in the meantime, Ajmal is saying the issues that ISPs become gatekeepers to which app or tech is successful, preventing new smaller guys from coming into the market. So what he's saying, I believe, is that the way this is being structured is that ISPs themselves are picking the winners and losers, right? So they're the ones who will basically say that this is what will be the messaging apps that are being used on our network, and we're not going to use these, and the authorities giving them license to do that. Is that something that we should be allowing? Do you think that's a fair statement? Don't need to answer it now, but that's the issue that's, I think, coming to the fore. It's bubbling up to the surface. And the larger issue, which I think is what Dev just mentioned, if you think about it for a second, what is being proposed is that the regulator in transmitters is essentially saying they should also be regulating overseas services, right? Services that they're used here, but they are not located here. They're not operating here, which will come up later in this document. So all of these tech companies, the Googles, the Facebooks, the Metas, and all the others which operate these services are not located here. They don't operate them here through data centers, but we use them here. And what this particular document is proposing is that we attempt to regulate them. What do you think about that? You know, that's what this is proposing. Go ahead, Dev.
Yeah. So then it also goes to the OTT media content regulation. So the authority to ensure audiences be protected regardless of the platforms which they consume content, the authority will ensure compliance with the relevant sections of the Constitution and the National Broadcast Policy. So based on that, the authority may recommend that the scope of the code include OTT services. So which raises an interesting question. And like, should OTTs be regulated within the Constitution and the broadcast policy? So if there's a link embedded on the form that goes to the National Broadcast Policy, and it specifies things, for example, the watershed. So the watershed, for example, is the period by which material that is unsuitable for children cannot be shown. It commences at 2200 hours and ends at 0500 hours. And then material unsuitable for children, and they do define it in the broadcast policy, but you can think about what it is: swearing, offensive, nudity, etc., etc. Material unsuitable for children should OTTs be required to not provide material outside of the watershed?
So the question therefore, and I'm just trying to position it for you guys here. So basically what that is implying is that YouTube, which has on-demand content, does not schedule content, right?
Yeah.
And other similar services, Netflix, etc., which all are on demand, shall not make available content that is considered to be outside the scope of the, in this scenario, let's say it's possible for children between 2200, 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. So that's what is basically being proposed in effect. And if that's the case, I'm not saying there's anything right or wrong with that, I'm just saying that's what's being proposed. But if that's the case, do you think that is enforceable? It's a question. Proceed, Dev.
Yeah. So now the other SBs now talks about jurisdictional challenges. So essentially that they think, obviously in recognizing that a small island by itself may be hard to regulate OTTs. If it could get greater collaboration within the Caribbean, then as a larger body, they may have more leverage. There's also that OTT will monitor trends in OTT investment and to capture OTT contributions to telecoms and infrastructure. So should OTTs be required to fund local telecoms infrastructure in Trinidad and Tobago? Should Netflix be required to pay the authority and/or ISPs?
So do you think they're saying, Dev, that there should be established a universal service fund in which
make contributions to that? Yes, yeah. OTT, YouTube, etc., etc., etc. Otherwise, because we fall under the remit, if you want if you wanted your service to be accessible in Trinidad and Tobago, you need to fund X amount of dollars to the Universal Service Fund.
So let me ask the reverse question. What would happen if they don't?
Well, that's an interesting question because essentially the framework will give the allowance that it could be considered unlawful or not allowed. So
which can open the case.
To me, it sounds ludicrous personally, but
so they in theory they could find them, right? I guess.
Yeah.
And potentially, as just Rodney just put the B word in the chat, block them.
Yeah. Yeah. Correct. So yeah, there's also statements on local content development, and it will conduct a feasibility of policy models for promoting local content, and it should collaborate with the relevant agencies responsible for the oversight of local content creation and promotion in Trinidad and Tobago. So yeah, so the idea being that maybe OTTs need to contribute more to local content and to local development. So, should it be allowed to have a quota and a share of local content? Or should OTTs have then a specific percentage of local content to be made available on their, catalog of programs? So that's, again, another issue coming up on that. And and I personally, I say no, because I think, I think no. But I mean, obviously, it would be interesting to hear what people think. So the question marks by Rodney Taylor, should we allow or not allow is blocked, and who would that hurt? I think it would hurt, I think it would hurt consumers, actually. Imagine if, say, YouTube was blocked, or, for example. I mean, I think that would be totally detrimental. And I think that the danger is, for a small island, we have a small market. If it's so onerous for OTT to operate in Trinidad, then it will be simpler to just simply, well, you know what? Rather than deal with that bureaucracy and that cost, as the return on investment from such a small market, we'll just cut you off. Yeah. So.
Right. Is another question from Mr. Neptune in the chat, or Miss Neptune, I'm not sure. Can someone dealing with cybersecurity treat with that? Because I don't think we are treating with that at this point. But please proceed with that. Anybody in the chat who wants to answer cybersecurity?
What happened to you was a comment from Stephen Abiraj. Yeah, kind of. Wasn't exactly. I guess it is a kind of OTT service, but I mean, it wasn't the ISPs who were offering a similar service. So it's not. There's a similarity there, but it's not. I mean, I don't think Uber would be considered a OTT service.
No, it isn't.
In a strict sense, unless an ISP was to start offering that service.
Yeah.
But generally, Uber would not be considered an OTT. So that was the thing on the second form. Should we just? I know it's running out of time. Should we at least go into the digital compact?
Yeah, but let me pause for a second, because we're taking some of the time that we lost in the other session, which was so.
Okay.
Let's pause and see if there's any feedback. And I did want to put someone on the spot. I want to put Mr. Rodney Taylor on the spot. Is he able to speak? Rodney, I put something in the chat about regional regulation thrust of internet policy type issues. I know you've been part of that discussion. Do you want to give any insights on what might be happening in a regional sense about this type of issue across the board? I know you've been at sessions in Canton and otherwise where this has been discussed. Is it something you can speak to or you'd like to speak to? Just give all of us a heads up what might be happening.
Sure. I'll speak with my camera off. Yeah, so we've, going back, and I mentioned this yesterday, going back to the Declaration of St. George's that was signed last year with the operators to reduce roaming charges in CARICOM. Ultimately, we're hoping, of course, for full elimination of roaming within CARICOM states for voice and data services and text as well. But coming out of that declaration, there are two things in particular that we were asked to follow up on. And one is the single regulator for CARICOM. So how can we harmonize regulations to the point where we move to actually a single regulatory framework? And number two, one, because that will reduce the cost of doing business to the operators who now have to comply with different regulations in each sovereign state of CARICOM. And the second one was to address the issue of the impact of OTTs on the businesses of the operators in the region. First, the operators have commissioned a study. I'll see if it's online and share the link that speaks to the negative impact, the fact that these OTTs are driving up the data usage and not having to pay anything because they're not regulated, and it is impacting their ability to build out in future networks and invest in 5G technologies and so on. I've shared a link there also to a report by Analysis Mason, which speaks to the positive impact of the investment that these big tech companies are making on the business models of the ISPs. So there are two sort of conflicting views on this. But in any event, we gave a commitment to bring the parties to the table, big tech companies and OTTs, and the network operators in the region working with Canto. And in fact, we are scheduled to have a kickoff meeting next month where we sit down and address these very issues. At the very least, I think that if there's an issue or if we do take regulatory approaches, that we have to ensure that consumers are not hurt. And that's why I posted the question there, but who really would it hurt? But at the same time, that we need to take a harmonized approach regionally, because Trinidad and Tobago dealing with a global big tech company is very different from the region taking a unified stand, to address this. So we are working on that. I can't say everything, but we are going to be meeting with all of the names you mentioned there. Confirmed they're meeting us on Netflix, Google, and the others, Meta, next month with the operators as well. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, SG Taylor. And that was very, I think, very informative and very promising. That at the very least, this is not going to be done in a vacuum. And there's the meeting of minds at a table, and we can probably get to some unified view and a harmonized view, as SG Taylor said, to move forward on this. So if there are no further questions on this area, Dev, since you have the screen share, can you throw up the form on the next form? Yeah. So do you want me to speak? Do you want me to walk through it, Dev, or you want to do it? Well, I'll walk through since I think you might be on mute. So just as I said at day one, and I've mentioned it again today, the United Nations has established basically a strategy for just going forward beyond where we are today. It's called our Common Agenda. And within our Common Agenda, there's a significant element for digital. It's called the Global Digital Compact. You can read that. It's again on the igf.tt website. We have the links that are, as Dev just threw up there, he shows you the links to these things. Apologies. And this is a global consultation on this particular topic. So as I mentioned, the GDC, the Global Digital Compact, is the digital component of our common future, the UN strategy for going ahead, the next several years, leading to the Summit of the Future, which is going to happen in 2024. This consultation on the GDC will be open until the end of March. And at the TTMAG and during the TTIGF, we have taken it upon ourselves to facilitate a local consultation, given that this is, in our wheelhouse on this particular topic. So, so you can read about it there, read a little bit more. We don't have the time to go through everything of what the GDC actually is. But Dev, you can just throw up the form now, and I'll just show you what the form looks like. It's just the Google form, yeah. And not that one, right? Exactly right. So we have produced a form that is essentially an adaptation of what the United Nations form is. It's the same data. We're just trying to put it in a way that you can collate it. We'd like others who are interested in this topic to use this opportunity to respond to the issues that are being addressed by this Global Digital Compact. So Dev, if you just can walk through this form here. I think you have to put your email. Yeah, I think that's mandatory. Yep. So it talks you, how are you an individual? Are you a region? Are you a country? All these things are not mandatory, but we do want to capture your email. So you can just walk through that. Yeah, it's not mandatory, so you can just push it out without that and it's saved. The form is saved as you go forward. Did you consult anyone to do it, or is it your individual submission? Go ahead. Is it next on that? Right. So the inputs are here. This screen here, there are 7 areas, and we're asking. Well, the UN is asking us to consult on these 7 areas. Connect all people to the internet, including all schools. These are the 7 what we call thrusts of the GDC. Avoid internet fragmentation. Protect data. Apply human rights online. Accountability for discrimination and misleading content. Regulation of artificial intelligence. That's a very hot topic, as we heard yesterday. Digital commons as a global public good. And you can add other areas as you see fit. So if you can click any or all of those. It's not a smart form, so it doesn't matter what you click. When you go to the next page, you will then be asked to identify 2 buckets of responses to each of the topics. So as you see there, the core principles, which are that all governments, companies, and civil society organizations and other stakeholders should adhere to. So that's one request for inputs. And the second request are key commitments, pledges, or actions, sorry, that in your view should be taken by different stakeholders. Governments, private sector, and civil society, etc. So for every one, so connect all people to the internet, avoid internet fragmentation, and so on, we're asking you to put your inputs there. It's as simple as that. And that's available online. And once you do that, we will collate that and submit it to the UN. So that's it. I'm going to pause here because time has run out on us. Do you have any thoughts or questions on this? What the UN is suggesting that we do? And do you think that this is a good idea? And remember, this is a part of a global consultation, and Trinidad and Tobago should really be part of this. So we are happy to do this on behalf of at least one part of Trinidad and Tobago, which is what the TTIGF community, and submit it on your behalf. So please do go to the igf.tt website. It's going to remain open until the end of February or thereabouts. What I can let you know is that we have already spoken to the CTU, the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, and they are also, doing a similar consultation regionally. And we would love to be part of that submission that we could submit, in a broader way, because the CTU is planning to do a global submission on behalf of small island developing states. So we want to work with Pacific Islands and so on. So that's in the works. And we'd love to see our views, Trinidad and Tobago's views, represented there as much as we possibly can so it's going to be Trinidad, Caribbean, SINs. So that'll be something I want to ensure that happens, and encourage all of you to do just that. Visit igf.tt, go to the open forum, and complete all of these open consultation documents. As we mentioned at the start, this is a process, it's not an event. So we are already beginning the process here of consultation and our interaction with you. And I think it's an excellent opportunity from this year to really engage with you beyond these 2 days and have this consultation continue onwards. So we have our net neutrality, our OTTs, and our Global Digital Compact consultations commencing now. Yeah. So any thoughts, any further feedback on that? I'm seeing in the chat, there's still a lot of discussion going on about cybersecurity. There's a comment from Curly Prescott, who was here yesterday. He's a TAT executive officer. As a point around blocking does not only have to mean killing full access. It can mean limited access. For example, blocking of ads or disabling or limiting other features of an app or site. Remember, there's a benefit to OTTs being here as well. So as long as the contribution to infrastructure is a fraction of the benefits being extracted, benefits extracted by OTTs, they will consider. Thank you very much, Mr. Prescott, for that. And that's TAT is listening to us very attentively, which is excellent. I think it's excellent work going on here. Thank you very much, everyone. So Dev, you have any final thoughts before we have Dev T? Or you have any hand back over to our chair? Dev T, if you might be on mute still if you're talking. All right, I don't think we're hearing you, Dev.
All right, good. Right, sorry about that. Yeah, I was on mute. Sorry about that. Just to mention that, the policy, these type of policies that impact end users, so it affect people in Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, there are other issues in the global fora, policy issues at SAIL, at LACNIC, for example, at ICANN, and so on. And it does involve understanding a lot of policies, which may seem dry. I'll be the first one to confess that, yes. But it is something important to do. And I think it's, rather than trying to do it individually on your own, it's better to collaborate with each other to try to at least share the workload or try to get, bounce off ideas, and which you can then take on in this and in other fora. So there's a more that, don't be an individual at doing it alone, collaborate, That's it, really.
Yeah, that's a really excellent point, I think. Yeah, so I think we are here for you as a TTMAG. We a good opportunity to facilitate this. We've done the work to put these up online for you. Thank you, DevT, for making it, breaking down the policies and making it easy. And thanks to Denise, actually, for building the forms so quickly that we could have done this so that you can have an easy way to capture that data. And we do encourage you, please don't, sit on this, sometimes you have to take action. You have to, make decisions and put inputs in so that your voices can be heard. And so you don't have to complain after. Because remember, if you don't say anything now, it'll just happen. Silence is consent. So, and I have very good first-hand experience of if you say something, people will actually make they'll make the change. So don't think that you don't say anything. Don't think if you say something it will not be heard. I don't think if you say nothing that your views will somehow magically just be incorporated. You have to say something. So if you don't agree with what's being said, if you don't like what TAT is producing, or if you like it, or if you have a great other idea, now's the time to say things. Let them hear what you have to say. You never know what could happen.
To its credit, I should say, Tracy, I mean, the Telecom Authority's approach to consultative documents is good in that regard, in that what happens is that they do a first round of comments, and then they publish what people submitted, and then the authorities response to that. So you get to see all your perspective, not just your perspective. You see you see your perspective, but you also see what other people have also said. And this good, to me, this is also good in that you get to see what other stakeholders are thinking, and you may then change your mind, or reframe what your thoughts are going forward. So it is good. My only complaint is that it's a very short time. Usually it's usually 4 weeks for when a policy comes out for comment, and a deadline for comments. That's my concern.
I think you have the right people listening to you.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so that's very helpful. Thank you very much, FT. And with that, I will, if there's nothing else, I see some, thank you for Ajmal, our moderator for the cybersecurity panel, for answering all of Miss or Mr. Neptune's questions. Thank you so much. Please do feel free to continue posting questions in the chat if you wish, and we can answer as long as we possibly can. But I think with that, I will probably suggest to DevT that we call an end to the session. What do you think, DevT?
Yes, I think so.
All right, great. So on your behalf, DevT, I will hand back over to the chair-elect of the TTMAG for the next year. He'll become the chair, Mr. Dev Gosai, who's also been our master of ceremonies, who will then take it from here to wrap up our session with a vote of thanks and some closing remarks.